The article "The Analogy from Chemistry" in Pope's Epistle to a Lady is a scholarly criticism of the poem "Epistle to a Lady," written by one of the greatest English poets, Alexander Pope. To summarize, "An Epistle to a Lady" is basically a description of Pope's ideal woman and how she was created. While describing his ideal woman, Martha Blount, he also criticizes and compares the qualities of the women he feels are immoral and not up to his standards. The author of "The Analogy from Chemistry" in Pope's Epistle to a Lady, Catherine Walls, argues that the final two stanzas of the poem display a quote-unquote "common metaphorical basis of chemistry." Walls begins by comparing Martha to Floyd, the main character in Jonathan Swift's To Miss Biddy Floyd, which is a poem about making and constructing a beautiful woman. Swift was a satirist and a poet, much like Pope, during the late 17th century and early 18th century until he passed away in 1745. It is evident why Walls chose to compare an epistle to this poem because both focus around the creation of a woman. Walls then argues that unlike Floyd, Martha is a contradiction to the materials Pope uses in the process to create her. Walls says, and I quote, "The materials listed by Pope, though intrinsic to the process, are not necessarily intrinsic to the resulting product." This quote can be found in the second paragraph of the article. Walls also uses information from Howard Weinbart to support her argument against Pope. Weinbart is a professor in the English department and a research professor in the science department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Pope compares Martha's divine maker, God, to a cook, thus making Martha the dish. But Weinbart argues that some terms Pope used, like for example "to blend," was not a phrase used in the kitchen in 1930s, and this poem was published in 1735. During that time, this phrase would have been used in a pharmaceutical situation compared to a kitchen. After these comparisons, Walls moved into her main focus, which is chemistry, and uses several notes, articles, and quotes from George Stahl to support her argument. Stahl was a German philosopher, physician, and chemist during the late 17th century and early 18th century. Walls uses Stahl's argument, which is that naturally occurring substances are mixtures because they arise from the natural conjunction of the fundamental sources of earth and water. Stahl's idea of a chemist is one that artificially replicates divinely ordained natural processes. This relates to Pope's impression of God because Stahl's human chemists mimic God, while Pope's God mimic the human chemist. Walls concludes this point by stating that Pope's God or human chemist selected the materials and mixed them together to produce a product, that product being Martha. Walls then compares some of Stahl's chemistry statements to the way Pope treats Martha in the poem. The first example is Pope's final verb "produces," which relates to Stahl's insistence on production as the chemist's goal, an insistence reflected in specific verbal terms. The second example is when Pope reaches the product by shaking substances together, which relates to Stahl's process of cohabiting. Cohabation was the pre-modern chemistry and alchemy process of repeating distillation of the same matter with the liquid taken from it, then that liquid being poured again and again on the matter left at the bottom of the vessel. The third example is Pope's use of fixed principles, which are the all-important materials and according to Stahl, that all things are made from God. The word "fixed" is used by Stahl often to describe components that are resistant to change. Walls moves to another German chemist's ideals to support her argument against Pope, Otto Tachenius. Tachnius consistently makes connections between inorganic substances and gender. He claims that acids and alkalis create new material through their embrace. Walls as Tachnius quote, which states, "The same alkali of tartar, being impregnated with acid sulphur, follows the nature thereof, and the same alkali impregnated with vinegar imitates the nature of the vinegar, and performs that which tartar of wine doth. Like as a woman who being married to a man loses her father's last name, and takes up that of her husband." This quote can be found in paragraph 8 of the article. The sexual analogy for chemical interaction provides support for Pope's representation of Martha. In the poem, Martha is already identified with the moon, and now she is the product of generative interaction between male and female principles. Walls concludes that Pope may be admitting that he is thankful to Martha's parents for having intercourse, although Pope does mention them in the poem, but in a condescending fashion. Wall's final argument is that Pope organized the last two stanzas into two consecutive processes. The second to last stanza, lines 269 through 280, describes the combining process of Martha's creation. The last stanza, lines 281 through 292, describes the refining process of Martha's creation. Walls uses evidence from the poem itself to reach this conclusion. For example, line 275 of the poem states, "Blends in exception to all general rules," suggests that the substances to create Martha are being mixed together. Also, line 287 from the last stanza states, "And gave you beauty, but denied the pelf," suggesting that Martha had been created, but final adjustments were being made. This argument concluded Wall's article.